This episode of the Huddle Breakdown is brought to you in association with the OneFootball app. The OneFootball app is the best football app on the market right now. Everything that you need on any team, in any league, is available in the OneFootball app now. The fixtures, the results, transfer news, and even stats, everything that you need on any team, any league is available in the OneFootball app. And in addition to all these other great features, the OneFootball app is now offering everyone in the UK and Ireland free match highlights from the Serie A every match week. And on top of that, they will have one free selected match on a Saturday, which will be live streaming across the app. So if you want to get all these other great features and get an opportunity to watch some Serie A football on a Saturday, then download the OneFootball app using the link in the description below. You'll be supporting the channel and you'll be getting a top-notch football app as well. Now you're welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. The gap is widening at the top of the SPFL table. Celtic are 7 points clear as we near closer to the World Cup break. They beat Dundee United 4-2 at the weekend. Sead Haksabanovic getting his first goals, plural, two always come at once when you have a sort of a deadlock that Sead had over the last couple of weeks. And they play Motherwell tomorrow night with just one more game remaining after that before we take a break for the World Cup in Qatar. We're one man short on the Huddle Breakdown this evening, but we will be doing a second episode this week where we will have the full deck of cards. But I'm delighted to say that Alan Morrison is fresh after a little trip away and back with us as we look back at the Dundee United win and look ahead to the Motherwell game tomorrow night as well. Alan, thanks for joining me. How are you?
Yeah, all right. And apologies, I didn't know we were doing a show today, so I didn't shave. So sorry about that. But I'm glad. I mean, the rumor is that the reason James isn't here is he's been called up to the American World Cup squad. So I don't know if that's true or not, but you know,
he's on the preliminary squad, anyway.
Yeah, there you go. They'll do anything not to pick Pulisic anymore, I think.
Yeah, exactly. No, look, it's been a couple of weeks since we've had a show. We didn't get a chance to do one last week because of the sort of different schedules that we've been on over the last number of weeks, and we didn't look back at the Real Madrid game. I think we're just going to park that. We're going to leave that in the past and leave the Champions League behind us because we do have a win to look back at, and that is 4-2 against Dundee United. It was looking hairy enough before the last couple of minutes when Kyogo and Abada stepped up and left a rather flattering scoreline, I guess, 4-2. Probably didn't reflect the overall structure of the game or how it looked like it was going to end before the final few minutes. But I was watching this in a hotel room on a pretty awful stream, but from what I could take from it in general, it was not a classic. We are very much at the point now of we're almost a month ahead of schedule. You know, the World Cup is coming up now soon, so we're compacting all these games together. These are usually the games that you get on the 21st or the 19th of December. These are games that, you know, Celtic don't play all that well, but generally get the result. And that seemed to be the same sort of performance that we got. It was a December-style performance from Celtic, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, normally we end up playing, I think, at least 9 games in December, usually. So it has been a kind of contracted sort of period. There's a lot of factors, 7 changes. And I know we've been changing the team quite a lot recently, but 7 is quite a lot of changes, to be honest. So that probably had a little bit. And it's certainly the attacking fluidity was sadly lacking, especially in the first half, I thought. Other thing is, as well, is if you've beaten a team 9-0 and then you play them again, they're hell bent on ensuring that doesn't happen again, right? So you know, they were always going to be set up, and in fact they're sort of mid block. They're sort of two sort of 5-3 sort of mid block was reasonably effective, but I think we suffered from a lot of maybe tired bodies, tired minds ourselves, despite the changes. The players have had a lot of football, combination of either just that fluidity and continuity not being there, and tired minds and bodies, because what was lacking was that movement up front. And then, you know, we were the centre-backs were playing the ball very safe. So in the first half, I think it was the 45th minute before Carter Vickers tried to play quite a difficult sort of long ball into the box. Neither centre-back had given the ball away in the whole of the first half before that. So that suggests a lack of risk in the passing. And we could see O'Reilly getting frustrated. We didn't think there was enough options further forward. I don't think, and I don't want to pick on David Turnbull because I don't think it was just him, but he in particular, he's not somebody that gives you that very well. A lot of the effort in the game in terms of the dirty side of it, the pressing, the counter pressing, again fell to O'Reilly and Hatate. And given that they've both of them nearly had 90 minutes and chasing Modric and Cruz around the Bernabeu, or more pertinently chasing Asensio and Valverde around the Bernabeu, that was, I think, probably quite a tough shift for them as well. So I'm not making excuses for anyone. I think it was just a very difficult. I think it was like always, there's a combination of factors that I think go into it not being a particularly fluid performance, I would say.
Yeah, the changes definitely do impact on the flow of the team and how they sort of play together, because I mean this was David Turnbull's first real proper number of minutes for a good few weeks, so he's probably not up to speed with what everyone else is doing, especially O'Reilly, who's been playing pretty much every single game so far this season. In terms of the overall structure of the team, it was pointed out to me by someone on Twitter, which I thought was a very good point, was that if you look at the way that, just focusing on the wingers, I guess, with Ralston at right back, Bernabei at left back, Haksabanovic and Jota as the two front wingers, then Haksabanovic and Jota are very similar players. They're very on the ball, high number of, I guess, chances created from them, all the ball going through them, dribbles, shots, crosses. It's all action sort of wingers. And then a right back and left back, you've got fullbacks who like to swing the ball in as well and get crosses into the box, rather than potentially being like Greg Taylor and Juranovic, where they're more inverted on the ball, playing through the middle sort of thing. Celtic have a wide variety of players now, but it seemed that we didn't have enough variety in the mix that we put on the pitch, if you get me. So we had Haksabanovic and Jota. Both were excellent, I thought, for large parts of the first half, but they're very similar players, and Giakoumakis doesn't give you much in behind either. So I guess that's why we see Abada being a player that gets in behind. Maeda gets in behind the defense. Kyogo as well when he got in. Sometimes you just need that one player up front that is different from the rest of the team.
Yeah, no, so I never really thought of that. I mean, I actually struggled to get the ball to Haksabanovic in the first half. He didn't actually, considering he scored 2 goals, he didn't actually touch the ball. And yeah, I think you're right what you say about him and Jota, and I think they're both high volume players. But we couldn't get the ball to him, and that was despite Ralston being one of the better performers in the game. Jota actually was pretty effective in that first half. He got on the ball a lot. It was his usual mix of creativity and trying things that don't come off and so forth. So I don't know if it was one thing. Like I say, I felt it was right to go wide because of obviously they'd packed the midfield. They'd got 2 players crowding the centre up front as well, and they got 3 centre backs. So it was absolutely the right thing to do, to try and go wide. We didn't get a lot of crosses in either. As I say, we just seem to rotate the ball around the back a lot, and that's not just the fault of the players that are doing that. It's the fault of the people in front of them if they're not making themselves wide open. I mean, another factor is that we started well. Obviously, got an early goal, and then I know you don't like to talk about decisions, but I do think that penalty spooked the team in some way. And it was such a bewildering decision that I did think it had a sort of effect on them, and then the game went into a lull. I mean, for a start, there was a number of stoppages, and there was a long. I think it was the 8th minute, almost immediately after Celtic's goal, that the ball was lumped into the box, and Bernabei was supposed to have handled it. It was about the 12th minute by the time that the penalty was taken.
Mm-hmm.
There was then another long delay when the goalkeeper was injured by his own player. And he went down. Then there was another long delay when they were checking for something else. I think a foul on Giakoumakis. There was these big long delays, and this far, I can see why Postecoglou's exasperated by it, because it just sort of kills the momentum of the team. Celtic want to play quickly. They want to unsettle the opposition. They want to tire them out both mentally and physically by getting the ball recycled quickly, by moving it quickly. And these big long gaps, I don't think are helping either. And I think Bernabei in particular personally looked really rattled and genuinely upset by the penalty decision. And it was interesting that it was taken off at half time, because I noticed they started to target him and started to bash into him a bit as the half wore on, and he was getting more and more sort of frustrated. So I think to take him off might be wise, because it wasn't like he was having a particularly terrible game or anything.
Yeah, well, the key point on that is that he got booked for the. Well, I don't know if he got booked for the handball, because I don't think you can get booked via VAR. I think he got booked for his.
He did.
He did get booked, but I don't think it was for the handball. If you know what I mean.
Right,
so
okay,
he didn't get booked for a deliberate handball. I think he got booked for his protestants rather than his quote unquote handball. I mean, I think that is a more interesting discussion than discussing whether or not that was a handball, because I think everybody's going to come out with, well, obviously not. He wasn't even looking at the ball when it went over, and his hand is where it is. And these are the decisions that we've seen for well over a year in world football now outside of Scotland, that are just bewildering, because it all comes down to subjectivity. Still comes down to the decisions based on the referees, who are already getting the decisions wrong in the first place. So, but the stoppages, I actually kind of monitored this. It took about 61 minutes to finish off the first half of football. And that is a key element of what Ange is trying to do at Celtic, is even with down to the ball boys, get the ball back into play as quickly as possible. Where all these stoppages do have an impact on a team like Celtic, who are trying to just go at the opposition almost all the time and keep them pressed in and keep the momentum going. And I definitely do think that does impact a team like Celtic. So yeah, the handball decision, I mean, we're going to see them. That's the issue. They're going to happen across the course of the season.
That's fine, as long as they're equally divided out as to who gets the terrible decisions.
I think we know they won't be.
So here's a sneak preview, hot off the press, just for the people watching today. So the Yorkshire Whistler has got back to me on that one. I've not published the article yet, but the word he used was baffling. Now, for those of you that are following the Honest Mistakes series on the Celtic by Numbers site, baffling would be probably James's equivalent of going absolutely fucking apeshit, right? So baffling is like, quite extreme for him in terms of a reaction. He just couldn't understand why they would even look at it. I think it's probably a bit unfortunate that Celtic have been on the end of a lot of these poor bad handball decisions in Europe in midweek, and obviously the one at Hearts, and then this one, in a very short period of time. It seems like you'd like to think that will even itself out a little bit as the season goes on. Because we got one at Livingston, which again I thought was harsh, because of the proximity of the player to the ball, but his hand was kind of up in the air. But what was just, again, worrying for me, and not for the reasons I've talked about before, is the fact that the same referee that didn't think the Smith handball at Hearts was a penalty is the same one that thought that the one by Bernabei was. And when as I say, when you take into account that person, essentially has an economic monetary arrangement with Rangers, you have to think, well, I'm not saying he's a supporter. I'm just saying there's doubt. You're putting this guy in an impossible situation because of that doubt, and therefore it's going to obviously be scrutinised in that way. And that's not fair on him, because he's got his own personal and professional integrity that he wants to protect as well. So I just think, again, it comes back to, you've got to trust the process. Now you'll still get some wrong, as I've said. Even if you had verifiably neutral referees and verifiable referees that verifiably didn't have a conflict of interest, you would still get terrible decisions. But I think we could all live with that if you remove that doubt about the veracity and whether the referees are actually conflicted or not in terms of their assignments.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the key point for me came from Ange after the game, and it's where I've stood on VAR for a good half a year now at this point, and that is, it makes it a worse experience for the fans in the stadium who are paying to go to these games. I mean, it makes some odds to me watching it on TV, but if I was a paying match going fan every single week, I have to stand there in the cold while a referee looks at a screen for 6 minutes to figure out whether or not Bernabei's hand is in an unnatural position. I'd be really pissed off, and it makes it a worse spectator sport. And this is a spectator sport. It is a sport, as that famous saying goes. It is a sport that is absolutely nothing without the people that is watching it. So I think we're going to reach a boiling point with VAR in the next year and a half, and that.
Yeah. I mean, it'll take time. Listen, I mean, it's only just been introduced here, so you've got to allow a certain number of problems to iron themselves out. Again, it doesn't have to be that way, right? I still think you've got to give people the best opportunity to get to the right decision, and if that means a bit of technology, that's fine. But what you've got to get right is the human process around the technology. And I don't know why we don't go down the road of copying rugby, where the referee and the VAR are mic'd up, it's piped into the stadium, the people can hear the conversation, and there's a full transparency about what is being asked to look at, on what basis, and what is the evidence that's being presented, and why you've reached the decision. And if the people in the stadium can see that, because we on the TV can see that to some extent, but it would be great if people in the stadium could see that, and then it's fully transparent then. And again, you're not going to be happy with all the decisions, all right? That's still going to be the case, but at least you'll understand why they came to the decision that they did. And I think it's that aspect of it that leaves room for doubt. It leaves room for conspiracy theories. It leaves room for all sorts of nonsense. And really what we want to do is make it as transparent as possible for the referees' own sake, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm. The final point we'll make on this is the Giakoumakis incident. There was a high challenge on him that was looked at by VAR. The referee, now, key point on this, the referee didn't bother to go look at his screen. Now he's advised by the VAR whether he should go and look at it. So it really comes down to that. But I think my key point on this is the referee didn't even give a foul in the first place for what was a high foot. Now, both players did have similar enough foot positions, but one player did catch the other player on the thigh with their studs. So it's a foul regardless. But the key point on it is that because the referee didn't give a foul, they only checked for a red card. Now, VAR can only make a decision on things that they are checking. So he could only check for a red card. So that meant the Dundee United player couldn't even be booked for the challenge, even if the referee deemed it to be a malicious tackle. If it wasn't meriting a red card in his eyes, then it's nothing. So he got a free shot at Giakoumakis' thigh with a high foot, and absolutely nothing was done. And that for me is where the problems come in with referees in Scotland. It's not incredulous handballs. It's not, certain teams getting more penalties. It's not penalties being given against Celtic that we disagree with. It's players getting hurt by these challenges that referees just blatantly ignore. And the physicality of Scotland is different to world football. Some leagues are more physical than others. Scotland has certainly remained a little bit more old school when it comes to letting the game flow. But when it comes to players getting hurt, Giakoumakis could have been injured seriously by that challenge, and it wasn't even given as a foul.
Yeah, it all comes back to the question of consistency, because similarly, something that Celtic, because I only watch Celtic games really, that I've noticed is, the number of times that a 6'3" centre-half goes down when a player hasn't even touched him, and immediately it's a free kick. And that's happened so many times in the last few weeks. I mean, Kingsley of Hearts was just, I think, did it 4 times, Cochrane 3 times. On the one hand, Scottish football, that they'll let too much go in terms of, really aggressive challenges. And on the other hand, we seem to be out of kilter with the way that a lot of the world was going. I think after the last Euros, where they really did start to be cracked down on those sort of soft fouls where players go down where they feel the slightest contact and they go down. It has to be something that's a bit more obvious, but that seems to be very inconsistently applied in Scotland, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Right, let's move on from the referee chat. So there was a game that went on amongst these refereeing decisions. There was a few hairy moments at the end where Celtic looked a little bit ragged at the back, especially when Dundee United had their tails up. And, the first goal is sort of lucky. I think, that's what happens. I have to give them a little bit of credit to, I think it was Stephen Fletcher made the run across that kind of got in the way of Hart's Island. I'm not sure you can do much about that. But I guess this is the ethos that keeps coming back to this side, is that they keep on going regardless of what the scoreline is, and they will eventually get their just goods. Was it something that Celtic changed that sort of got their their tails going again and won this game eventually, or was it just the fact that they've got better players on the pitch that were fitter and were able to go for longer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is more or less that as we've said before, that if you've got 5 substitutions you can make, and although we had to probably sacrifice Bernabei in terms of the way the game was going for him, four attacking substitutions and the relative quality compared to what Dundee United can do, they're generally going to be reducing the quality of their team, by making substitutions. And Celtic are, well, apart from Dylan Levitt, who's probably the best midfielder, came on. But Celtic can like for like, or certainly change the dynamic. So you get more pressing, more energy from Maeda, Kyogo when they came on, and obviously Abada, who I think had an excellent 50 minutes in the Bernabeu against Real Madrid, and then got really tired and had to be taken off after about 60 minutes. He's I think he's slowly getting his confidence to take players on, be more direct. His finish for his goal was just exquisite. So I think it was just that quality that teams can't live with in terms of the number of changes you can make, and therefore the number of different challenges you can set the other team. Because usually oftentimes you'll see when Celtic make their changes, they do get on top quite quickly because it's a whole new set of movements, a new set of positions, people making different runs. You kind of get into a routine over a game of 60 minutes. You get used to where people are running to, you get used to which foot they take it on and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that whereas I think, as I said, VAR is being disruptive for Celtic in for many reasons, mainly the flow of the game actually. The substitute law is a huge advantage, I think.
Mm-hmm. Especially for the bigger sides that have
Yeah.
these players at their disposal. On Abada, before we move on to other matters, I've never really came across a young player like him whereby he can be genuinely awful at times at certain aspects of the game. But when it comes to picking a player in the Celtic side in a one-on-one situation, or a player who I want in the box getting on the ball with an opportunity, I think Abada is probably number 1, if not 2, within that Celtic attacking line, because he's just incredibly clinical. And that's something that usually you would say that's something that would come. It's usually the other aspects that a young player is good at, like the dribbling, the taking on players, being exciting. And then it's usually the end product that they have to add. Is it a positive thing for Abada here that it's actually the latter, the opposite with him, that he has all of the end product and he just needs to add 1 or 2 little bits of dynamic gameplay to his sort of attacking arsenal, if you want to use that phrase?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to decision making, and I think that almost the closer he gets to goal, the better his decision making becomes. The further away from goal he is, the worse his decision making comes in terms of linking play, making the right run at the right time, when to release the pass and so forth. But when you get him in the box, he makes great decisions. There is nobody in Scotland that has a higher expected goals plus expected assists than he does. He's averaging 1.21 goals and expected assists per 90 minutes. For context, the next highest in the Celtic team would be Kyogo at just over 1, and then Giakoumakis is 0.72, and then you've got Forrest is 0.72 as well, and then you've got the likes of Jota's numbers 0.886 actually, so it's pretty good as well. But 1.21, I mean, I know it's only 500 and something minutes that he's played, but I mean he was around about 1 last season on a full season. So this is a guy that whatever you might think about some of his poor decisions and his poor execution, has got an incredibly high productivity rate in terms of creating chances and taking shots. And his goal and assist record it backs it up as well. So there's something he's got something very special, and I think if he's coachable, I still think there's an outstanding player there. It's just that, as I say, it's the way I would sort of characterize it is just, I think that the further he is from goal, almost the worse his decisions become. But he really sharpens up once he gets nearer to goal.
1.21 xG per 90 minutes this year, is it?
So it's expected scoring contribution. So expected
Okay, so
scoring.
that's not it's not just the goals. So he has. So I'm trying to figure out whether he's overperforming or underperforming on his XG so far. So
So
he has
he'll be
7 goals, 2
he'll be
assists in
under.
the league this year.
Yeah, so he's at the moment his scoring contribution. He's actually bang on. His scoring contribution in the league is 1.2 goals and assists per 90 minutes, which is probably the highest in the league. But his expected scoring contribution, expected goals plus expected assists, is 1.21. So it's almost identical. So
Okay.
not a surprise.
So what that tells to me is that while we have players like Haksabanovic and Jota, that maybe it's not the best idea to play both of them at the same time and have the sort of the trio of a mix in the front line where you have Jota and all of his massive amount of sort of volume in what he's trying to do. You get your best striker, be that Abada or be that Giakoumakis or Kyogo in the middle, and then you have Abada in there to be in the box and be that threat.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right answer. I mean, I was thinking the other day that with Jota and Haksabanovic would potentially be the best sort of attacking threat, but we saw on the weekend that it didn't really click. I know Haksabanovic got 2 goals, Jota got an assist, but we couldn't get them on the ball as much, and it's not just their fault. As I say, it's a team.
It's
thing.
a midfield as well. Yeah,
it's a midfield. It's the speed of passing, speed of thought, but it's the movement off the ball and all these things. And it tends to be a symptom of tiredness and just general sort of fatigue across the team. But so I think the answer, the question, which is the best wing combination, I think is an open question. I don't know. I'd have to go away and think about that. We've probably not seen that high a sample of all of the different combinations that you could possibly have yet. And I still wonder if it's an area where we might see some sort of movement, because Maeda hasn't been in great form, and yet he's still chipped in with a few goals. He's got a lot of assists as well. Abada, people sort of complaining about him, but as I say, he's got the highest expected scoring contribution and scoring contribution of any player in Scotland in the league. So these are nice problems to have, I think, is how I would conclude it. Yeah.
If we were playing a video game, if this was Football Manager, I'd probably go with my front three, but life is not a football manager simulation. So we'll keep going. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about that aren't really specific to on the field, although they definitely correlate to on the field. The Celtic AGM was last Friday, I think, or last week anyway, it happened. And Ange was asked about how to improve the club, or how Celtic are going to improve the club. And he said that they need to be more active in the transfer market. This will be uncomfortable for some. I know fans live to have their heroes, but to achieve at this level, we need to be much more active. So that almost sounds like active, not in the sense of bringing players in, but moving players on as well, something that we've spoken about a lot on this podcast. And again, in the press conference ahead of the Motherwell game today, Ange was asked about whether or not the World Cup break would give him an opportunity to work on January transfers. And he said that the January transfer work is essentially done already, and that the World Cup break will be the summer transfer window next year. So imagine that, as Celtic manager, planning ahead and working ahead of the current schedule that he's on. So I guess that is positive signs if you look at it a purely business and football progression standpoint, where we have a manager here who's planning ahead and planning to move on players at the best possible time and sell them. Probably not the best news if you're a fan of keeping your really best players at the club and the players that you like. For me, that sounds a bit like somebody will leave in January, be that Juranovic, O'Reilly, or Jota, any of the three that were linked with moves away already from the club, and Jota not so much, since we were trying to bring him in on the transfer market. But O'Reilly and Juranovic were definitely linked with moves away. Can you see that being something that happens in January, or do you think Ange's talking more long term here?
Yeah, no, I think it's more about a sort of culture of how to run the club. So, to do this, the whole club's got to be in lockstep in terms of how you arrange your business across the year. And it's really heartening to hear this, because it sounds organised, it sounds planned, and I suspect previous managers would have been quite happy to have adopted the same approach, but they probably weren't allowed to. So it's an absolute revolution in terms of how Celtic are doing their business, and hopefully it's something which isn't dependent on Postecoglou being in the building. It's something which we is repeatable and is a way of working that is almost agnostic of who the manager actually is, right? So in terms of if James were here, he would be 100% behind this in terms of buy low and sell high, essentially. And although none of us can take sentiment out of it, if you want to grow the club and get better players, then you're going to have to make money. And although the Champions League is nice, we've seen how precarious that is, what difficult the journey it can be, or how difficult it can be when you get there. And then the vagaries of coefficient points and how long will Scotland have a automatic place. We don't know if all the teams perform like they did last season, then that's not going to last very long. So you've got to be able to have this. The only other way to, and Celtic have already got very good commercial deals. I'm sure that people can say they might do a little bit better on that, but in terms of really pushing the dial forward of bringing more money into the club and raising the profile, it's having a history and a tradition of providing richer clubs with good players. And if you've got that reputation, then people are going to be interested in your players. I think Celtic got a pretty good reputation in that regard. But it's been we have genuinely had a player trading model, I think, for about probably 8 to 10 years, as opposed to something that you talk about but never do. I think we have actually had one, and it's been the case that if we don't do well in Europe, then we generally sell a big name. So generally speaking, one big name a year. If we don't do well at all, there might be one or two that go. I think what Ange is saying is you need to be even more proactive than that. So it's not using player trading as a way to again, and this was all lol ball really. Lol ball was about the bottom line and what did that look like. So if it looked like you weren't going to break even at the end of the year, then you sell a player. What Postecoglou is saying is you sell players to grow the club. That's very different. It's a completely different way of looking at it. The bottom line will take care of itself in that regard, because that will look good. But your focus should be on growing the club and on getting better players in, and that may mean taking uncomfortable decisions for us in terms of selling players that we think we haven't seen enough of, or we really love, or whatever. But if the offer's too good to be true, you've got to look at the optimum price point in terms of how old that player is, how many years have they got left on the contract, etc., and then try and work. Obviously, then you've got to have a demand for that player. So all these things require a lot of management and a lot of time and a lot of effort to work through. But I think with the increasing, we seem to be making smart decisions in the transfer market, and the recruitment of Abelgor, of Haksabanovic from Rubin. I believe, for a lot less money than what was said in the press. This looks like this Kobayashi is effectively going to be a free transfer, and he's a reasonably highly rated young centre back, 22 years old, so another sort of good age profile. I know James wants more teenagers in. I think this 22, 23 year age profile is a good one for Celtic to start with, because there's enough history there and enough data to show you that you can have confidence, but also there's a sweet spot that we seem to be hitting, which is players who've had a big move, it's not worked out, and this is like their second chance at a big club. And I think that sounds very specific, but I suspect there's a lot of players that are in that bracket, and that's not a bad market to sort of be fishing around in on the sort of buying side.
Well, on that, Virgil van Dijk did the what's that show called? Gary Neville, it's called. He where he talks to these guys. Anyway, Virgil van Dijk was on, and he spoke about his move to Celtic, and he wasn't a young guy really. If you're talking about the scale that we work on with James and myself and yourself on this show, and he said that it was amazing that he came in and you're at a giant club, and he didn't realize that until he got here, but he very soon realized how big Celtic are in terms of the fan base and the level that they're playing at when they're in the Champions League, and the experience you get that definitely helps you going in. And I think if you're talking about where we're looking to sell our players to, is probably still England, unfortunately. but they're looking for guys who are ready for first team football, not guys who are developing. If they're not bringing in their own teenagers, they're looking for 23, 24, 25-year-olds with first team experience. So I think if what Ange is talking about here is not sort of doing anything different to what we're doing already. I think it's like what you're saying, just doing it a lot quicker, because we've undercut ourselves a lot over the last 10 years. And I think it is down to what you're saying. It is down to Lawwell's mindset. It's not really about growth. It was more about just steadiness and securing the club. And maybe that comes from where he took the club from in a very unstable position and steadied the ship over the long course of
it was
16 years or so.
It was an accountant's perspective versus, if I can call it, like a football director's perspective, who's thinking about strategy and the long-term development of the club and the team. And I think that's the difference. I mean, it's interesting what you say about Van Dijk, because I think to use the examples of Van Dijk and Wanyama, Celtic will not be buying players like that again. As long as football is structured the way it is, we won't be buying players like that ever again, because Wanyama was a relative. I think he was 20. Well, Wanyama was, I think, 19, 20, playing in the Belgian league, and Van Dijk was, I think, 22, and he was part of a Groningen team in the Netherlands that finished about 5th in the league, which is, for them, I mean, they're rarely in the top division, and so to finish 5th was a fantastic season. If those two players were in that same scenario today, they'd be at Salzburg by the time they were 18, right? And that would have cost them, and that would have been for like 10+ million. We can't operate in that market at the moment. So that's changed utterly, and that will not happen again. There's always exceptions. We might get lucky with a player, but we're more likely to pick up a player on the cheap, like a Carter Vickers or a Jota, who's been to a big club, hasn't quite made it into the first team, is still young, still hungry, wants to prove themselves, wants to come and show what they can do on a big stage. That, I think, is a much more realistic profile, if you like.
The Overlap is the name of that show, by the way. I knew it was over something, but
never heard of it. Sorry.
No, it is really good. You get sort of insights into players like Van Dijk, for example, who are more open with past players for some reason than they are with journalists. But I'd take a look at that if you're interested in former Celtic players. But I think for me, I guess Kieran Tierney is the ultimate example of the mindset change that Celtic fans need to undergo and will need to get used to over the next couple of years, because Kieran Tierney is a player who I think he still should have went for more, but look, he went for what he went for. But that's the level of fee that Celtic need to be demanding over the next couple of years for the players if they want to make the progressions that Ange spoke about in the Champions League. And Celtic fans really need to get their head around the fact that they cannot hound every player that moves out of the club to another club in the Premier League if they want to progress, because I frankly thought the treatment of Kieran Tierney was ridiculous, because of course he was going to take the job. Anybody would have taken that job in his position. And ultimately, eventually, it really does not really come down to him. If Celtic get an offer for that fee, they're not going to reject it. So it was a move that happened. He was hounded for it. I thought he shouldn't have been hounded for it. And Jota is probably going to move. O'Reilly is probably going to move. These younger players who are at the club are coming to develop and eventually be sold on. That is not just a player's decision to develop their career. That is also the club's decision. That's why they're bringing them to the club in the first place. They're bringing them in to get the best out of them as they possibly can for the short period of time that they have, and then sell them on. So I think we really need to get our heads around that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you want to get value, and we've seen with Jota and Carter Vickers, if you want to get decent value, then you're really looking at a sort of price point around about 10 million, maybe just under. Celtic aren't going to be spending, or never have spent more than that, really, and aren't going to be in a position to do that. So if you're going to do that, then you need to have, so let's look at a model. So a model is a simplification, right? But if you had a 25 million player every transfer window, and you could bring in 8 million players, that's the sort of thing that I think. And I'm not saying that's precisely what we'll do, but I'm saying that's the kind of model that we need to move to if we want to actually grow the team. Because, I hope it was obvious to everybody on Wednesday the absolute chasm in quality between Real Madrid and Celtic players. It was just, and yes, we were brave. Yes, we were on the front foot. Yes, we created lots of chances, but they nearly scored virtually every single time they went into, near our box, right? And you just look at the profile of the players, and and I'll use, and people might think this is an unfair comparison, but three players that on each side that I think are a decent comparator. Okay, so you look at the lad that came on for them at right back, Lucas Vasquez. Okay, I don't know a lot about Lucas Vasquez. All I know is what I saw the other night. He's small and he's quick. We've got Greg Taylor, equal size. So Greg Taylor, as we all know, runs his heart out, will run all day, and is desperate to improve as a footballer. But he'll never have that searing pace that Lucas Vasquez has. So Real Madrid are willing to trade off not having a big right back or full back, because this guy's got these physical attributes that more than compensate for it. I mentioned Asensio and Valverde, right? Two players that are still young. One's, I think, Asensio, I know he seems like he's been around forever. He's only 26. Valverde's only 24. Okay? They're both 6 foot, right? They're both really quick. They're both physically strong, and they both run all day. And they're both excellent technical footballers. Now, you compare that to Matt O'Reilly and David Turnbull. They're both 6 foot. They're both technically very good footballers, but they're a bit slow and they're not that physical. That's what I'm talking about. It's not just, we've got good footballers, but to get to that level and compete, you've got to have the full package of physicality, physical intelligence, as well as football intelligence and, technical ability as well. And that's a really, really tough thing to pull together. As I said to you, you look at that Leipzig front line, they're all 6 foot, they're all strong, they're all really quick, and they're all brilliant technically. That's what these clubs are buying when they're buying the 17, 18-year-olds, and some of them won't make it, obviously. But so we need to. There's a huge physicality and physical deficit in our team as a minimum. It doesn't mean we have to go out and buy pure athletes that aren't technical. We've got to try and find a way to attract players that have got that full package. Otherwise, we're never going to make a dent in the Champions League.
Mm-hmm. Valverde is also an interesting. Asensio and Valverde are two interesting
fantastic footballers.
Because both of them, Asensio was out of the team for a large chunk of his Real Madrid career, and Valverde was almost a lost cause until last year. So it also does show you that the player that you want isn't always necessarily someone that you bring in. It could also be a player who, like Anthony Ralston at right back. I'm not saying he's as good as Valverde, but what I'm saying is these players can progress, they can improve, they can get better when it comes to coaching and positioning and learning the game and learning how to make themselves better. So we'll wait and see. It's a very, very interesting period for Celtic and Celtic's history and where they're going to be standing in world football in the next couple of years. And we'll see what happens if Ange Postecoglou does leave the club in the next couple of years, because God knows what will happen then. But we'll leave that and we'll cross that bridge when it eventually comes. We do have a game tomorrow night, Motherwell away. It's the second last game before the World Cup break. Celtic have already beaten Motherwell this season, and one of the times it was not as easy. The second time it was much easier. Third time lucky. What are we expecting from Celtic? So next or tomorrow night. So I would expect probably another couple of changes, maybe not 7 changes from the team at the weekend, but 5 or 6.
Well, yeah, I think he'll go as strong as he can. I think he's got 2 games left to really secure, cement a sort of 7-point lead at the top of the table, which I think will be a huge bonus for everyone, or a great position for the club to be in going into that break. So I think hopefully the sort of the lethargy and any sort of slight despondency, if I can allow to use that word, I felt after the sort of hammering in Madrid will have been shaken off. A bit of euphoria after the last minute sort of win at the weekend. I expect us to fully go for it. Now, Motherwell have been a team that we kind of like playing recently. I know they've changed managers, but they've still got this kind of 4-3-3 feel to them, and they're quite easy to play through for Celtic. They do have, they are, if you look at the stats for the season, they look like they're going to be sort of solidly either the 5th or 6th best team in the league. They're not really quite threatening. I mean, I know Aberdeen and Hibs results are up and down, but their underlying numbers suggest they're probably the second, third best team in the league. Hearts probably just below that. Motherwell are kind of the best of the rest in that regard, the best of the sort of smaller teams, if you like. They do have a good attacking threat. They do get relatively their XG's about the fourth or fifth highest in the league. The number of shots they have similar. So they're decent. I think they do rely on set pieces. Their set piece expected goals is higher than anyone else's in the league, actually. So that's again, that's going to be a concern. They do probably take too many shots from outside the box, more than what they should, and that probably what explains some of their shot volume, which is quite high. And then defensively, they're a little bit on the wrong end of their expected goals at both ends. Maybe a little bit of bad luck there. Nothing major. So this is going to be it's going to be a tricky game. But it's a team that I think the way that we play, that we get through the lines quickly. I think because they don't have a lot of mobility really in the middle of the park, especially they tend to go for grafters. Players that want to try and sort of make contact, as Robbie Nielsen says, and that sort of thing. But if we're quick, we tend to find we can play through them, and then they tend to like quite big defenders that we can move around. So it's a team that I think profiles quite well for us. As I say, the only thing is they are probably the most effective at set pieces in the league, so we need to watch that.
Yeah, I just want to clarify something because there's a couple of comments going in about O'Reilly. We're not saying O'Reilly is a bad player. We're just saying he's not Federico Valverde or Marco Asensio good. He's a very, very good player. Trust me. The
point was, if you look at O'Reilly, and this is true of huge number of professional footballers. If you look at Matt O'Reilly has got top end, I would say mental. Football intelligence skills in terms of the speed of brain movement. He's got excellent technical abilities in terms of awareness, touch, first touch, body positioning, body shape, etc. But he's not very quick, right? And if you want to play for Real Madrid, you need to have all the things that O'Reilly's got, and you need to be strong, and you need to be fast. That's the point that we're trying to make here.
Yeah,
and that's a tough market.
Yeah, we're definitely not saying that Matt O'Reilly is a bad player. No, definitely not. Just finally on the Motherwell game, you mentioned the sort of the get stuck in mentality that's been shittered around over the last couple of weeks about from several different opposition managers when it comes to Celtic. Surely for me, I don't know. I guess this comes down to a broader discussion on what you want to do against a team like Celtic. You can't do one or the other. You can't have some players getting stuck in and diving into challenges and being aggressive and going man to man, and then have other players sitting back. So I guess that's the mixture that Motherwell are hoping to avoid tomorrow night, because I guess if you think back to the Scottish Cup semi-final or quarterfinal that we played them in, the 4-0 game, it was very much that, where they were playing a low block, a tight defense, trying to be solid, and then you had their midfield players diving into challenges and trying to nick the ball back and break. But that just opens up space for Celtic's players when they play through it inevitably, like Matt O'Reilly does tend to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be sort of critical or come across as being, dismissive of teams like Motherwell or St Mirren or what have you. Of course, you're going to play that way. I mean, it's the best way to frustrate Celtic. You put men behind the ball. You will be compact. You will sort of, shrink the space between the lines. You will tell your ball boys to go and sit in the stand. You'll do everything you can to disrupt momentum, slow the game down, etc., etc. You'll try and make the game an arm wrestle as opposed to a free-flowing contest. I mean, there's many ways to play football, and if you're not a club that can, fill your team with silky footballers, then of course you're gonna do that. I mean, Celtic have tried to take on Real Madrid at a style of football that only the most elite clubs in Europe play, right? And frankly, it's been I would say a third successful, in the sense that we've created a lot of chances, but we haven't taken them. But we've given up a shed load. We're nearly 5 xG. away to Madrid. We conceded 5 goals. It could have been 8. I'm not even exaggerating. As I've said to you before, I did an article on this, is that the risk with the absolute elite teams is once they get to 2xG and above, it could be 6, it could be 5, 6, 7, because their high-end finishing is better than yours. And once that momentum's there and you start to lose shape and discipline and heart, then the goals can just rack up very quickly. As we saw, it was 1 every 10 minutes in that second half. And at 5-0, it looked like it could be 8-9. So, similarly, if Motherwell set out to play like Celtic did in the Bernabeu, then I would expect us to win 5-1. You know what I mean? Frankly, if they tried to do that, so of course they're going to play like that. I mean, it makes complete sense. I think that it's just this emphasis on Scotland that that's all you sort of focus on. That is your strategy. It's like what I would hope that Motherwell are also doing, because to me, I would take it for granted that your players are going to run around a lot, try really hard, concentrate, be vocal, be committed, etc. What would we be thinking about with them over the week is how are we going to score a goal? What are we going to do in these moments when we are in the final third? How are we going to get into the final third? That's the coaching. That's coaching a football team, not telling them, you need to get tight, you need to get first contact and all this bollocks. And that, to me, that's just like minimum. It's just minimum standards, right?
It's bare minimum stuff. It is bare minimums. Like if you don't have players that are willing to put in a shift, to use that term, then they're going to get destroyed anyway. So I mean, it is bare minimum stuff. I would say now, to give them credit, there's probably more going on behind the scenes, and they're just giving the political answer that they think is just going to fill the lines that the journalists need to fill in their papers or on the space in the radio. So look, we'll wait and see what goes on tomorrow night. I think I'm going to go with a Celtic victory, potentially even could be a 10-point gap at the top of the table by the World Cup break. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think John Beaton will have something to say about that. to get back to our previous theme. I'll be confident for tomorrow. As I say, I think it's a good matchup for us in terms of the way that Motherwell play. I think we've been pretty consistent. We've had the St Mirren game was a bit of a shock. We had a few frights. You're going to get that, right? I mean, Real Madrid lost to Rayo Vallecano on the weekend. These things do happen, right? But I think it'll be fully focused. There's no distractions now. It's just 2 games to go. Everybody apart from McGregor pretty much is fit, so it should be all guns blazing, I think, tomorrow night. So looking forward to it. Not that I can get to watch it anywhere, of course. So thanks, Sky TV, for that one.
Yeah. There's that's another discussion altogether. But they have practically no football on tomorrow night at all to show, and they're still not showing it. So
and they don't even show the full. They don't even show the number of games they've contractually bought. That's the other astonishing thing about it. And I think Motherwell are charging something like 17 quid to watch. You can watch it on their pay-per-view for 17 quid.
Mm-hmm. The beauty of Scottish football, huh?
It's just
Alan.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Look, that's probably us for this evening on the Huddle Breakdown. Like I said, we will try and do a review of that game that nobody's going to be able to watch tomorrow night. I'm sure most people will find a way. If you're not going down to the game, then you'll probably find a way on His Goal or on IPTV or something. But hopefully we get to watch some of it at least, and we'll be able to touch on that with a full trio on Thursday night with James back in the mix as well. Alan, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Enda.
And thanks to everybody who is commenting and still commenting. Keep the comments coming underneath the channel. And if you are not subscribed to the channel and you want to get the video, get the Huddle Breakdown, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel by hitting subscribe below and get notified every time a video goes live. And if you want to catch the podcast later on, then you can get that on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts as well. Until Thursday night, we'll chat to you later. Good luck.